Well, welcome distinguished guests who have come here all the way from India and distinguished guests who have come here all the way from Kensington and Randwick and the distinguished members of the vibrant Indian community we have in Australia and our good friends we have from the University of New South Wales here in Sydney and EY. I'd like to firstly acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land, and I'd like to pay respects to the elders, both past and present, of the Eora Nation, which we meet today, land that has belonged to these people for 65,000 years, so one of the world's oldest civilisations. I'm Tim Harcourt, I'm your MC for tonight. I'm available for bar mitzvahs and weddings if you need me. I'm from the University of New South Wales, and I'm really excited to be here as part of the Festival of India Illuminated, that we're putting on for this week. It's great to celebrate the great cultural ties between India and Australia, and it's also important to acknowledge the business and economic ties, and that's why the business school's making this contribution tonight. It's interesting, you know, as an airport economist, I think I've been to about 60 countries in the last 5 years, and I would go everywhere for about 3 days, but I'd go to India for about 4 times a year, and it was only 20 years ago where we would say to Australians about India, "Where the bolly, how are you?" Because India was not enticing for Australian business, and it was a bit like the Australian cricket team under Greg Chappell that didn't want to tour India. But times have really changed as India's become one of the world's economic superpowers, re-emerging. You've got to remember, if you look at economic history back to when Moses was in short pants 2 millennia, India and China dominated the world economy. So the re-emergence of India as an economic superpower has meant, once again, businesses are looking to India, and Australia is now looking to India, and even the cricketers get in on the act with their marketing. There was a time when an aspiring Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, said that India and Australia was just the 3 Cs, cricket, curry and Commonwealth, and he wanted to change that, and we want to change that too. A lot of emphasis is put on Australia's links in terms of rocks and crops, going from the mining boom to the dining boom, but we also know that there's the importance of education and professional services and technology and the things that we share together. I've noticed also the importance of Indian-Australian partnerships. When I was filming the Airport Economist TV show in Mumbai in July on Sky News and Qantas, but I don't want to plug the show tonight because it's a university event. In the telecommunications space, we actually had an interview with Infosys and Telstra. And Telstra was represented by Sundi Balu, an Indian national, and Infosys was represented by Andrew Groff, an Australian national. So you actually saw an Indian and Australian representing their counterpart company and doing it very well. And another partnership that's important has been in education. We also interviewed Amit Dasgupta, University of New South Wales Country Director, very distinguished diplomat now working for the university, and the current Australian Consul General, Tony Hoover, talking about the partnerships between Australia and India in terms of education. And that's why we're here today, because you know that the university is building its ties with India very strongly. The Gandhi Oration, high-profile events like India Illuminated, and University of New South Wales even has its own Bollywood film, From Sydney With Love, that was filmed on the Kensington campus. Now, along with Professor Chris Stiles, who's the Dean of the Business School, who's a scholar very committed to engagement with Asia, particularly India, I also want to welcome our Pro Vice-Chancellor, Laurie Piercy, who's been instrumental in raising the university's profile in India. And I want to ask Laurie to formally welcome you to tonight's event.
Thank you so much, Airport Economist. Can I start this evening by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, and on behalf of UNSW Sydney, Australia's global university, formally welcome you to tonight's conversation. India Illuminated is a week-long celebration of the India-Australia bilateral relationship. At UNSW, we are passionate in the transformative power of ideas, and we are passionate in the transformative power of international education. Way back when, in 1952, when UNSW was just 3 years old, our founding fathers, and unfortunately they were just founding fathers, but at least they took an extraordinary leap of faith, and they welcomed the first international students under the Colombo Plan to UNSW. And they came from India, they came from across South Asia and Southeast Asia more broadly. And this was at a time when Australia was not the vibrant, beating, multicultural metropolis that we all know today. It was at a time when internationalization and global engagement for universities wasn't quite as sexy as it is internationally today. But the University of New South Wales, we believe from the very beginning in the power of international education. And in the 1960s, we were at 10% international, which in those days globally, I think was just about unheard of. And it's in recognition of those origins that we think that the defining relationship for Australia's economic, cultural, and political success in this, the 21st century, will be our ties with India. And the events that we've seen over the last 2 days, ranging from student roundtables to hackathons, student startup sessions, henna tattoo sessions on campus, drop-in chai, you name it. Bringing India and India's rich history of its commitment to education. And let's not forget that as universities, we often like to talk about the ancients of Oxford and Cambridge, but India is home to some of the world's ancestors of higher education. So universities like Takshashila and Nalanda, I would argue, are the ancestors of all of the world's universities. And India has invested in education and put stock and cultural capital in the value of education. But tonight is all about India's economy and India's reform agenda. And I can't help myself with a cricket pun and say that the Modi government has been consistently getting runs on the board. Runs on the board in terms of a goods and services tax. And it wasn't that long ago that here in Australia we had the same national conversation around how we treat tax. And I know that for our colleagues in EY, tax is, we love tax. Those of us in the real world don't, but that's another story. But it is important for the competitiveness of an economy in terms of its overall tax base. And India is fundamentally committed to thinking about how it can become a more attractive place to do business. And as we look to diversify our economy, as we look to engage with institutions, with governments, with corporations, and I might add that tonight we're really lucky to have the strong support of one of India's, and indeed I think the world's iconic companies, and that is Tata Consultancy Services, and also owned by the Tata Group, the Taj Hotels Group. Really iconic, innovative companies that are driving such a huge change in terms of India's engagement with the world. And UNSW is delighted to bring just a small snapshot of India to you tonight. And don't forget to tweet. The hashtag is UNSW India, and I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Laurie, for your contribution, and thanks, Chris Stiles and the Business School for supporting the event. When Chris started as Dean, one of the courses he put together, which I had the pleasure of teaching, was doing business in India in the MBA school, in the AGSM, where we spent a week in India, which was very, very, very popular amongst our students, and very popular with the Mumbai bar till, I think, too, for that week. That's good. Now, I'd like to ask the panel to take their seats. I'm trying to see what the batting order is. I might just ask them all to come up on stage and take their seats, and we'll introduce them. Tell you a little bit about each of them before they're over opening statement so they can be prepared. So, Marlene Kunga is here. Can we give Marlene a bit of a clap? She's quite a pioneer in many ways. She was telling me that in Goa, in her birthplace, her father was responsible for the electrification of the city. And so she first studied under a lamp and then later an electric line. And it inspired her to be an engineer. And when she first came to Australia, I think our good friends at Border Control didn't believe there were any women engineers possible, but she really showed them and has gone on to many honours, including an Order of Australia, founding her own company and being President of the World Federation of Engineering Organisations. Pretty impressive effort. Thanks, Martin. Now, we have, as Laurie mentioned, Tata Consulting Services has been very generous helping us out, and they're quite an amazing company when you go to India. One thing that's interesting about China and India is that when China developed, it really relied on foreign direct investment and the Walmartisation. While India had Tata, Infosys, Mittal, really great global companies that have been really able to take on the world, including TCS. Amit Yasaka is a bit of a star. I was checking out the Hindu online business section, and he was actually headhunted when he was doing a bit of lobbying for another company in Washington. As you know, there's often issues with visas and human capital with so many smart Indian engineers and IT specialists in the United States, and he had a bit of a job on Capitol Hill. Lucky President Trump wasn't there when you were doing that job, but anyway, TCS picked him up, so please welcome. Now, the third panellist is Kylie Bell. Kylie held very senior positions in Australia as the Senior Trade Commissioner in Mumbai. In fact, she was there when we took the HSM class through, and also in Madrid and in the Philippines, I believe. And she got, all the smart Australian people get headhunted, and she got headhunted by EY to be head of their practice for India and ASEAN. Not bad, eh? Quite a lot to do there, Kylie. Please welcome Kylie. And finally, Professor Rajendra Srivastava. Is that right? I was practicing that. Raj is the Dean of the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. He's in fact been a bit of an airport dean himself, because he's been in Atlanta, in Texas, and in Singapore as well, where you were provost, I believe, in Singapore. He explained to me that there's a difference between being provost and being president. When you're provost of a university, you've got to do 70% of the work, and the president does 30% of the work, gets all of the glory, or something like that. But an expert on management and marketing. Please welcome Raj to before we get stuck into the questions and the debate, we thought we'd give each of our panellists a bit of a go at an opening statement, because we've heard a lot in the press about the new India. This India is different. There's a new regime. There's Modi Mania. There's Digital India. There's Make in India. There's the Smart Cities program. And for the little press that we get in Australia, we'd like to get a bit of a feel for what's behind all that. So in each opening statement, I wanted each panellist to sort of address, is the new India different than the old one? And what's one important sector or theme that's of interest to them? So I think Marlene, you might be the opening bat for today.
Thank you, Tim. It's a great pleasure to be here. I brought along a book that I co-edited with Professor Amitabh Mathur. It's called Hullabaloo, which is a fuss about the India-Australia relationship. And it was published by the Australia-India Institute, of which I'm a distinguished fellow. And with the book, the idea of the book came about. Sorry,
Can you hear the mic on? While you're doing that, we can hold up the camera.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. And the idea for for the book, and it has contributors from various people who've actually worked in India, done business in India, and are doing business with India, is to find out what is the secret ingredient, if you like, the mirchi and the masala, the little spice that will really make things work. Because we've been talking about India and Australia for a long time, but really we really haven't made a great deal of progress from where I sit. Our trade with India still languishes around 10th. We're in the top 10, but China's at the top. And China trade has progressed significantly faster and grown very quickly. With India, we do about $10 billion, and we do mainly, resources, coal. So you talk India trade, it's mainly coal, and then we do a little bit of other things, including food and a few, other minerals and so forth. Gold and jewelry, apparently. Don't know who's buying that. Must be the Indians over here, because that's the other thing. We have a huge population. We have about nearly 500,000 Indian origin in Australia. Indians, in fact, are the second highest contributor of migrant population to the tax system after the British. So that's very interesting. And I was also a member of a group with the Australian Council of Learned Academies on a project which was called, there were actually 12 projects on looking to the future to secure Australia's future. And this particular project that I was on looked at the diaspora, the Indian and Chinese diaspora, and the contribution they can make to Australia. And the thesis and the conclusion it became was that the role of the diaspora, both Indian and Chinese, but we focus more on India, is quite important because this diaspora has the language, the culture, and most importantly, the networks to do business, to build those relationships in research, in business, and in trade. And we don't leverage that enough. It's a huge resource that we could do more with. And I think that these are the sorts of things that we need to really progress. I'm passionate about innovation. I sit on the National Innovation Board of Australia, and that's another thing that we think very hard about, and how Australia can progress in the innovation stakes. And I think this is what's very different. The new India is moving very fast in terms of technology and innovation. And in fact, it's now ranking third behind US and Israel in terms of VC capital flowing into India. And there are thousands of new companies being formed. FinTech, aggregation and so forth. And importantly, the young people in India, they're educated in the key STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and have an appetite for risk, which Australian young people lack. And it's a push and pull factor. Being an entrepreneur is a route to getting rich, of course, get rich quick. So everyone wants to have a go. But the result is that we've got thousands of new companies forming. And I think that Australia is also pursuing an innovation agenda. And we also have realized the fact that this is a way for Australia to remain a leading economy. And one of the ways that we can do it is to partner with innovative companies in India to share technology and to build new companies. And I think finally I'd like to say that Forbes brought out its list of the most innovative companies in the world, and there were 4 companies from India, ranking quite highly. TCS was on the list. In Australia, we had only one in rank 87, and that was Ramsay Health Care. Only one. But this shows you the balance. If it's happening in India, and they had 4 companies and many more in the wings, whereas Australia hasn't. So I think there's a lot for Australia to gain, for us to be more active, more proactive in the innovation stakes,
and to look at technology rather than resources as a source of future partnership and gain for us all. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. Isn't it funny when you do innovation surveys, like when we were at Austrade, we'd do a survey and we'd ask everyone, are you innovative? And they would say yes. And then we'd ask them, are you going to bring in a new product or service? They go, you know, so it's a bit how you measure it, isn't it? So if you want to do a partnership, you've got to go and see Tata. We've had a local perspective. You come to Australia a lot. What's your perspective of the new India Bima business looking to go there?
Thank you for having me here. I think it's an exciting time to be in India. I would say that there are 3 or 4 reasons which are the new India or which are changing right now. There's growth. I mean, it's one of the fastest growing economies, already probably the 3rd largest in the world by PPP. And we haven't even scratched the surface. Right? There's enormous headroom to grow. Because while GDP is the 3rd largest in the world, per capita GDP is at sub-Saharan African levels. So there's huge opportunity to grow. Interestingly, the erstwhile socialist baggage that India's policymakers had has been completely dumped. And there's enormous aspiration levels. There's a young population. Wealth or creating wealth or contributing to wealth is no longer a bad word. And a lot of it can actually be seen in popular culture, the way it's changing. If you roll back and see the Bollywood movies of the 70s and the 80s, it would always be poor versus rich, and the poor person was always the hero and the rich were always the villains, because that was the socialist mindset that the country had. Now if you see them, they're completely different, right? You'll probably see the hero and the heroine, romancing each other on a bridge, right? So there's a lot of change. There's a lot of aspiration among the young people, and they refer to risk-taking ability. Very, very interesting. A lot of new startups coming up. Tech adoption and digitization is a theme which is very, very strong, and that's something which is running across. And the government is really helping, because the new government is stable. There's political stability. There's push to help from making government investments, technology adoption, digitization, reducing friction of doing business, increasing the ease of doing business. And I think it's just an extremely exciting time to be in India. But is it all hunky-dory? No. There are definitely problems. It's not an easy market to do business in. Let me state that up front. It is complicated. There is red tape. There are infrastructure skills issues which exist. I was talking to an Australian company, and funny you mentioned coal. A coal exporter from Australia talking to me a few days back. I said the cost of shipping coal from the east coast to India is lesser than shipping it from the port in India to the power plant within India. So those are costs which are there. And why do they come up? They come up because of poor quality of infrastructure, as well as red tape and a lot of friction which gets created. But the good part is that the government is aware of it, and it's taking steps on a daily basis to improve that. People who get it right, I think they can just explore. And I can just give you a couple of examples. So a new telecom operator entered the market last year. Within, I think, less than 50 days, they had 100 million customers. 100 million customers within 3 months. I mean, that's incredible, right? I mean, that's the kind of scale. If you get it right, you can really use the scale. And example after example shows that Motorola sold some 4 million phones in the first 2 months of the new model being launched. 4 million phones. Right? So if you get it right, you can really do very well. So to sum it up, I think there are challenges that need to be overcome, but if you can get it right, it's a great time to be in India.
Well, thanks, Ahmed. And you're telling me that the end of socialism has also got to Kerala, or is the rest of the country we mean?
Well, I think the interesting part there is what, since it's a federal country, right? So there's a federated structure, so the states have enormous powers and enormous laws. What the government has very smartly done, the central government, is they've created a ease of doing business ranking, and they are encouraging the states to compete against each other, right, for investment and for new businesses, and that's going to change the trajectory. I mean, states who don't shape up will obviously be left behind.
Let's make sure the premise is right. Kylie, what do you tell your clients about the new India when you take them over there?
So, firstly, I think the first thing I tell them is that India is changing rapidly. So I lived there from 2010 to 2015. And I think Australians who don't travel regularly to India don't understand the energy and the entrepreneurship and the innovation and the disruption that's happening every day. So every time I go back to Mumbai in particular or Delhi, something's changed. You know, there's the skyline's changed, there's new companies, there's startups doing things. I think because there's 1.3 billion people, and Marlene summed it up very well, because there's so many people and competition is so rife, everyone's willing to have a go and take a chance and do something innovative and creative. And so I think the first message I give to my clients is it's really important that Australia takes a look. Many Australians in business went to India, I don't know, in the early 2000s and maybe got food poisoning. You know, I hear it all the time, got gum, missed my flight, it was, you know, uncomfortable, it was hot, it was wet, I didn't really like it, and I didn't get a deal straight away, so I'd much prefer to do business in China. And many haven't taken the opportunity to look back and I guess look at the new India and look at the young population. I mean, the demographics of India are staggering. Today, 50% of the population is under 25 years old. The average age of people in India is very much like EY, 27, so I'm very old in my company. I'm very old and I go to India, so it's all good. By 2030, it will be the world's most populous country. So understanding those demographics and how they impact on demand for Australian technology, Australian services, Australian products is going to be critical. Everyone compares India to China. I see it all the time in my office, except for Laurie. But really there is quite a big difference. So India is a service-led economy. India has been driven by the service sector. Today, I think 60% of the GDP in India is driven by services. India exports services, it doesn't export manufactured goods. So there's a big difference in terms of what Australia can export there. Yes, we export coal, but I think over time we'll see that probably declining. The other thing about India is it's self-sufficient in a lot of, India is one of the world's largest producers of food and agribusiness. So a lot of the products that we as Australians might export or send to markets like China or to Southeast Asia are going to be very different. So our position there or our strength there is probably less around exporting products, services and widgets and more looking at forming partnerships around our IP, our expertise in industries that are going to be critical to India's future, partnering with the 600 million under 25-year-olds, working with them on education, training, taking advantage of their amazing skill set and their entrepreneurship and their fantastic attitude, taking our knowledge from here, partnering with that, and then maybe taking that either to solutions in India or taking that to markets around the world. You know, so together India and Australia can be doing fantastic things in the Middle East, in Africa, and it's about trying to understand what our strengths are. And I guess rather than looking to India, you won't have to go to TCS's campus and their innovation centre to know actually they're ahead of they're ahead of the game. So the whole we have to, rather than try and just sell something, we really have to look at how we can
We
partner.
just announced the innovation lab in New South Wales.
Oh, you did.
Good, so we've got some of that happening here. But I guess, sorry?
We'd like to host it.
Yeah, but that's where I see. So, you know, I'm back in India on Friday. I travel there every 3 or 4 months, and I guess the message is that every time I arrive at the airport in New Delhi or in Mumbai or in Bangalore, is I see more foreigners, and I see more foreigners from Germany. I see more foreigners from the US, from Canada, from Europe, from Japan, from Korea. I don't hear nearly enough Australian accents as I should, and ours are pretty thick, so they're hard to miss. But I guess the message is our competition, Australia's competition, has woken up and is really much more deeply engaged with India. And I think if we want to keep up and take advantage of the next wave of global growth, we have to be part of that. So.
Well, thanks, Carly. Professor Raj, you've had a perspective from Texas, New York, Singapore, and in India. Is this the most exciting time to be in India? ever?
I was actually headed back to the US. My wife was from New York, reminded me that we went to Singapore for 2 years, 8 years ago. So she was intent on heading back. ISP had been approaching me for several years, and actually had to admit it. Once Modi got elected, I thought something would change. So I went back to India with the intent of actually getting something done. And I've been there for about 2 years, and one of the things that strikes me really is the country is open for business. The youngsters in particular are very open to taking risks, and we see a tremendous climate. One of the things that Modi has been able to do, and this, you mentioned, is the rankings business. So it's not just ranking of states. The state I'm at Hyderabad, and Hyderabad is in a state called Telangana, and Telangana is currently ranked #1 by NITI, it's called National Institute for Transformation of India, and it's ranked #1 in terms of ease of doing business. Just around our school, we have 18 engineering schools just in Hyderabad. We run a program, we're a management school in the middle of these 18 engineering schools. We run a program called the Technology Entrepreneurship Program, TEP. We're taking 1,200 seniors, fourth-year students from engineering schools, and we're putting them through a technology entrepreneurship program. And these kids, you can see the excitement and commitment. Now, you don't expect 20-year-olds to go out and generate jobs right away. But one of the unintended outcomes, these guys will eventually, some of them will eventually be entrepreneurs. But one of the outcomes of this program has been that they get placed better because they're thinking not just engineering, they're thinking business. And I'm just sort of trying to give you a flavor of what is happening with youngsters. A lot of comments have been made about the demographic dividend and how India's going to have the largest workforce and so on. But one also needs to go a layer below that to dig some other things that are happening. So if the GDP is increasing, let's say 7%, it is not, unfortunately or fortunately, being distributed equally. And what you will find, for example, last year was a slow year, but the automotive sector increased by 12.7%. Last year was a slow year, but the airline business increased by over 25%. So, you're seeing, you need to understand, where to look. Tremendous growth in healthcare. You go to the Gurgaon area, this is a new city outside of Delhi, and you've got a new hospital, major hospital, popping up every 2 or 3 months. So, tremendous growth in those areas. So the other thing I wanted to emphasize is that there is no one India. Everybody thinks, when they think of India, they think of information technology, they think of call services, but that's not really what's going on. Where's the opportunity right now? It's infrastructure. The biggest growth is happening in roadways. It's happening in airports. India is going to be opening up. When we take the top tier airports out, we're going to be putting in close to 150 new airports in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And so the only thing that's holding back the airline industry in India is the availability of planes and the availability of pilots. What else is going on? It's really human capital. Yes, there've been lots of movies, and everybody knows about how Silicon Valley co-founders have been 30% from India, probably 20 out of the 30 coming from the Indian Institutes of Technology. But there's human capital now in law. Law firms marketing research is being done, out of India. And it's not marketing research about India, it's marketing research about China. When I was in Singapore, TCS funded an innovation lab. And what we were doing was we were looking at smart cities issues out of Singapore. But the smart cities we were working on were in China, the infrastructure development in China, but the programming work was being done out of India. So sometimes you need to start thinking creatively. It's not necessarily bilateral. It could be trilateral. You mentioned about how the telecom company got 100 million customers. There's a company called Paytm, and Paytm is basically a payments wallet, and they had about 22 million customers, but over an 18-month period, they've grown from 22 million to 240 million. Okay, this is electronic funds transfer. The government has set up something called the biometric project, the Aadhaar project, and with that, they're using for verification 2 retinas and 10 fingerprints. There is no identity theft in India with that kind of verification. But just the technology that was required to put it in place. So when I got an Aadhaar card, my 10 fingerprints and my 2 retinas had to be compared with over 1 billion sets of 10 fingerprints. I mean, so if you think of the technology investment that is required, and now countries like Kenya and so on are interested in how do we implement a system like that. So, India can be a big contributor, if you will, to technology, not just a user. And so, I can, look at other areas. You look at automotive supply chain. So if you go to India, if you're interested in IT, okay, fine, Bangalore. But if you're interested in the automotive sector, it's going to be Chennai, it's going to be Pune, it's going to be Gurgaon, it's going to be Ludhiana. And so there is no one India, and we often make the mistake, India is a tough place to do business. But it's your own damn fault if you decide to go to West Bengal. No, I'm being serious. You want to do business, you go to Andhra Pradesh, you come to Telangana, you go to Gujarat. So the best way to get around these problems is get a partner who's going to take you through the maze. And what are some of the other things? If we talk about human capital, I was in the elevator about 3 weeks ago, and I had been a visiting faculty at the Indian School of Business when it started in 2001, and this guy ran into me and says, "Prof, you don't remember me." I don't remember every student I run into, and but he was from the first batch in 2001, and he was working for Accenture. Guess how many consultants or how many employees Accenture has who come from India? I'll answer the question for you because you never guess it. It's about 250,000. There are more Accenture employees out of India than the rest of the world combined. And so it's the scale of human capital that is available. And so one of the things that Australian companies ought to be looking is how do we leverage some of this. So it's not, so one value of course is the market. What does India have to sell? It's a huge consumer market. And a very quickly growing consumer market. So you can say, all right, it's kind of unstable, I'll come into India when things have settled down. You'll make a mistake. This company, Suzuki from Japan, entered the automobile market 2 decades ago, and they're still holding 48% of the market share of the fastest growing market in the world. So, what I'm trying to say to Australian business is the greatest risk you have is not taking the risk. So you kind of feel that, well, we don't really know what's going on, and I can tell you who's taking the risk. I mentioned Paytm. Guess who owns 40% of Paytm? Alipay, which is owned by Ant Financial, which is controlled by Alibaba. So, if you guys are not, if you're going to sit down and think about it and gaze at your navel, Somebody else is going to act. So let me stop.
Thanks, Raj, and thanks for the airport plug and all that. Mumbai and Bangalore's looking pretty good now when you go there. I'm interested in the views of the panel. Modi Mania, you see this Make in India slogan everywhere, Digital India and so on. If India's so diverse, so that there's the Detroit of Asia in Chennai, and there's IT in Bangalore and Hyderabad, with different clusters, why would there be a Make in India push overall? Why is the need for this national country branding? Is it for foreign investment, or is it just a rah-rah to get behind the flag, or is it protectionist? What's your view?
That's a bit of rah-rah, but there's a lot of potential to it. So, yes, make it India, fine. But some of the problems that were being referred, you can get the coal to the port and it costs more to get the coal from the port to the manufacturer. To the manufacturing facility. So India is now making a tremendous amount of investment in infrastructure, including, when you look at Indian investment now, IT is probably going to be like number 7 in the list. At the top of the list is highways and roadways. Okay? Number 3, I believe, is railways. Number 4 is ports. Number 2, I'm forgetting what it is. I've got it here and I can look it up later on. But to give you a sense, India was constructing 2 kilometers per day in terms of new roads before Modi came in. India is now doing 30 kilometers of highway per day. So this infrastructure problem that we have is going to slowly go away, but there's a lot of work to be done. 5 years ago, if you were in India, chances are very high that you'd face a brownout or a blackout on a daily basis. Now, with the leverage of solar power, at least in Hyderabad,
In fact,
there's a surplus.
2016 was the first year in India's history where the power situation was a surplus situation in 70 years.
So when you have power shortage, obviously it's going to affect your productivity. Things are happening in transportation. People don't realize that if you're stuck in traffic, that's time wasted that could have been spent on sleep or working. And so the investments that are being made in smart cities, it's not all about IT. It is leveraging information to improve the transportation system. It's leveraging information to improve healthcare. And so, I can speak, since I'm based in Hyderabad, and Hyderabad is one city that is making tremendous, progress in leveraging information, for transportation, in leveraging information. So we have health institutes that are using, analytics to improve diagnostics. The global center for health analytics for Novartis is not in Europe, it's in Hyderabad. So again, it's human talent. I think what makes Hyderabad attractive to Novartis is talent.
You heard it here first, folks. Hyderabad, the Garden City, beautiful place. Colin, you want to jump in there?
I think it is around attracting foreign investment. So India's demographic dividend can also become its demographic problem if jobs aren't created. If you have a young population of half the population under 27 and they do their education and they can't then get jobs, it really is, part of it is looking at how we can diversify the Indian economy and grow the Indian economy across many segments, so that there is an element, I think, of employment creation there, because if India wants to keep growing and keep socially, robust, the future kids of today will need jobs. And as the service sector changes and things like robotics and automation, and TCS would know this very well, as some of these things impact on Accenture's people in India, they need to make sure that there's a diversified pool of industries that can create jobs for the kids of the future. So I think that's an important part as well.
Mate, your take on Make in India.
I think it's a combination of both. One of the challenges that this government faced when they came in was the India brand has eroded quite a lot, right? And it was known more for scams and scandals, and so this was an initiative which was one of the first things that the new government launched, was to sort of tell the world that India is open for business. And the combination, yes, it's creating jobs, but it's not just make for India, but also make for the world. So the single largest exporter of automobile and automobile-related equipment from India is actually Ford. Ford manufactures more vehicles in India. After NAFTA, the NAFTA region, India is number 2. Hyundai, actually after Korea, India is number 2 as a manufacturing place for them. So there's a combination of both, but Ford doesn't sell too much in India. It's all for the other markets that they do. There's a combination of both. So we as a group, the Tata Group, and I just plug in a little bit. We've been making in India much before Make in India was made a slogan, right? But it's just the fact that yes, there is enormous opportunity and ability to use that low cost base, because the cost of human labor or cost of manufacturing in China is increasing. India is far more competitive, so use that as a manufacturing base for the rest of the world.
Now, Marlene, I wanted to pick up this issue of Australian SMEs going into India and the leveraging the Indian diaspora. So there's 50,000 Australian exporters, SME exporters out there. Now 10,000 will go to China, about 2,000 will go to India. Small companies, Clark's, Floria Jeans, have a great time in India. Swear by Leighton's did more work in India than they did in China, and yet Linfox had a pretty hard time in India and diverted to Thailand and Vietnam. Do you think that in terms of red tape and regulation, it's got a lot better? And the point about the Indian diaspora that I was interested in, because we have an increasingly Indian presence in Australia. Peter Varghese, when he was the High Commissioner in India, he's from Africa but Indian origin. A very senior person indeed. He was in fact the secretary at one stage. When they sent him as High Commissioner to Delhi, a lot of people wouldn't deal with him because they said he was the wrong caste. Do you think being of Indian background can cause problems, or do you think it's more of an advantage, or do you have to have a mixture of foreign and Indian to succeed?
Well, 2 questions there, so I'll take the SME question first. From a personal perspective, my company is an SME. We've developed some new technology in video analytics, and we've tried for a long time, more than 10 years, to break into the Indian market. And as a small company, we face different problems from larger companies, because obviously the power structure is different. But we hit a lot of roadblocks. One of them is corruption. Very hard to deal with, and it was very open and blatant. And I've lived in Australia a long time, and we were frankly quite shocked at the openness of this. And it caused us to retreat for a while, because we didn't know how to quite deal with this. Like, you won't get this business if you don't, face this or do it, do certain things.
You left the lights on.
So, yeah. But, so that's one issue. And I think there's some, having a background in India you might think help you to deal with the culture and understanding India. But because India is so diverse, it opens the door, but it doesn't take you much further. You've got to work hard at it. I think that doing deals in India is quite difficult. We deal with large companies to avoid the corruption issue, because the large companies have good governance processes. But then there are other issues, such as the contractual issues, the pricing issues, the payment system. They'll tend to not pay you for a long time, and you're going to argue. And just because they see you as a small company. So, you've got an agreement, but they don't follow. So it's tough. It really is tough, and I can see why a lot of companies walk away. And why do we keep going back? Because of the opportunities. I think the opportunities are huge, and so you just got to have that tenacity to hang in there. And I think I agree that we should leverage what Australia has, the comparative advantages of Australia, which complement what's there in India, and look at it in terms of we can work together, not just within India, but also outside. I think that trilateral approach is very important, and I think that possibly is a way to success, because there's something in it for the other party as well.
Ahmed and Raj,
Yeah, so, I think there are challenges, and it's not hunky-dory, but I would say that Australia is grossly underinvested in India. I mean, Indian investment in Australia is higher than Australian investment in India.
Yes.
And Qantas doesn't even fly to India. I mean, come on.
They're my sponsor, but just
The best thing the best Australian export that one can have is tourism, right? And I don't think Australia is doing enough. There's a young population which wants to spend, which wants to travel. Very low it's a low hanging fruit for Australia.
with a polygon.
Yeah, but get a flight first, right? And connections, and you travel to India, I travel to Australia, so connections are pitiful. I mean, it's an 11-hour flight, but it takes 20 hours to reach here. So it's not convenient. So that I think we need to get
6 hour fines when that flight and then never been the same. What's your perspective of Australia and Raj? I mean, we've talked a lot about India. As an Indian, how do you see Australia? How is it different than what you thought before you came here? Being a little bit polite.
Well, I mean, I'll differentiate the perception of Australia of the common average Indian versus my perception. I think from my perspective, it's a great place to do business. We are heavily invested. We have 3,000 employees in Australia, and we are expanding. We are hiring 1 Australian a day.
One Australian.
I quite sad. It's like sure day. Delightful.
Didn't know what right to say to anyone else.
So we are very excited. We see a lot of interesting opportunity here. It's a great, clean place to do business. So we don't have friction or issues around that, and the Tata Group is obviously about letting go of business but not doing the wrong thing. So for us, from our ethics perspective, it's very nice. I think it's a little bit isolated, not just in terms of distance, but in terms of mindset as well. I rarely see an Australian company, with ambitions of going global fast. Right? We work in the Australian market and we're happy. Right? Nestle does $1 billion worth of business in India. Tim Tams aren't even present.
They're in Israel. Tim Tams is still up there.
So there's that part of it is something which is maybe cultural, but that's my view that Australian business tends to expand maybe in New Zealand, and that's it. Right? Not really looking at it from a global
What
perspective.
about colleagues in Asia?
Yeah, and
I have to say, having lived in India and Asia, I do feel Australia should be right, mate. We've got a good view and life is good, and we don't have the same hunger driving us as other emerging markets. We're quite comfortable. So yes, I think, and maybe that's
I
just
agree.
it. Yeah,
Like-
maybe it's even in the
like
innovation
the-
rankings. Now we only have 1. Yet when I worked for the Australian government, we used to position ourselves as one of the world's most innovative countries. But I think if you look at what's happened in Asia, in China, in Korea, in Japan, in India over the last 5 to 10 years, they've invested heavily in R&D. They've got programs to support that innovation, and we've lost I think it's fair to say we've lost some of our competitive position, and Australia has started to fall in some of those rankings.
26 years of economic growth. Just a fluke,
Uninterrupted
is it?
growth, and that's because we consume. Growth is led by consumption, not necessarily internationalisation.
What do you think about this, Raj? All this doom and gloom?
I think Australians go to safe havens. You know, I spent almost 8 years in Singapore, and
Taken over.
Australians are quite happy in Singapore because of old colonial connections. They're reasonably happy in Hong Kong. I had some Australian friends who would had connections all the way to South Africa across the Indian Ocean. And so there's a tendency to hang around in the country or hang around with countries where you have an affinity.
So why is there so many in Chengdu and Chongqing and Qingdao? Is that
I think partly it was through the perception of the ease of doing business. You could work with the top Chinese hierarchy. You had one or two decision makers who could clear projects for you, and so things would happen quickly. In India, you have to be patient. You need probably a local partner to get things moving for you. So it doesn't fit in with the business culture, if you will. But I think one needs to look for the long run. If you look at, I used to do quite a bit of work for Motorola in Tianjin, in China, in the late 90s and early 2000s. Motorola was a big contributor to the development of cellular wireless networks in China. But once they had served the purpose, it was transfer of IP, this, that, and the other, the Chinese quickly took over. Alibaba is owned 40% by Yahoo. And yet, when they started Ant Financials and Alipay, it was started outside of Alibaba. So, what you'll get in India is a lot fairer play. And but you have to be there in the long run. And in India, we have checks and balances. The Supreme Court holds, Modi's government.
so, Kylie, if you don't get fair play and you find yourself on a sticky wicket, what services do you get to dig yourself out, or what insurance can you take as an Australian company going to India?
Well, I think the things I would say about Australian companies going to India are the same I would say that Australian companies going anywhere is, of course, spend some time to understand the market. India is very different. It's 29 states, and it's big enough actually to not go to all 29 states. In fact, it's big enough just to go to Hyderabad. Or it's big enough not even to go to a state, it's big enough to just go to 4 customers. So it really is about, I guess, firstly, spending some time, as Marlene said, to understand who you're trying to sell to, who you're trying to partner with. Australians as a group, if we look at our foreign investment abroad, we tend to want to sell, but we don't tend to want to necessarily put skin in the game. So there are a number of Australian companies that have put down bricks and mortar and people, and often they're smaller, agile companies as opposed to the big, the big end of town, and they tend to do well because I think making that commitment and forming those local partnerships is important. But due diligence, the same as I would say to you if you're going to China, or the same as Vietnam, is understanding the market, understanding who you're working with. Don't do, there is bribery and corruption as there is across Asia. There are ethical companies, and we're sitting with Tata, who's one of the most ethical brands in the world. So it's a matter of walking away from a deal if it's not the right deal. There will be another deal down the line, and making sure that you work with professional advisors to give you some guidance as to, this company is a good company, not so much here. This is, the tax, this is the duty, these are the things that you need to be aware of.
If I may add one
Yeah.
thing, Australia has to look at what is the asset that you have.
Yeah.
Okay, so tourism was mentioned. Just to put things in context, India has more heritage properties than anywhere you can think of. You go to the Red Fort in Delhi, or you go to the fort in Agra, and they make all the fortresses in Europe look like toy fortresses. And there's a lot of heritage properties, but India does less tourism than Thailand. It's about half the tourist income of Thailand. Now, what are Australians good at doing? You guys are pretty good at this stuff. And so, it would be a good idea for companies, Accor and so on and so forth, that have a strong presence in Australia to bring the expertise, to India. So it's not just, here's got Taj there. But I think there's plenty of business opportunities for Australian companies. But you have to ask, what do we know in Australia that is better than people? So you have to think of your asset. And the big asset would be, look at Accenture. They are leveraging India for their global operations. But Accenture is kind of late. Citigroup has been doing that for 3 decades. So, what India has to offer is human capital. What you may have is financial capital. What you may have is expertise.
IP.
Yeah.
I've got to tell you, when it comes to tourism, you're going to love a lucky door prize at the end of the night. Look, I'm aware that, as Yogi Berra said, we're lost, but we're making good time. We did start a bit later, so I've let the discussion go, but there is time for a couple of questions or statements, or anyone's got a company that's had experience in India and you'd like to share it with us, or ask the panel a question, you're welcome to. We'll have a bit of time for questions, and then we're going to wrap up and give you a drink and some music and a door prize outside. So, has anyone got a pressing statement or observation they'd like to make? Yes. You say your name, title, company, where you live.
How long I've lived in Australia?
That's good.
Yeah. Well, my name is Malik. I head global innovation open ecosystem. We launched in India, in Cochin and Bangalore, growing across in India. And the idea and the origin came from Sydney and my partners. But what we looked at was to launch a global network. And we've heard about accelerators and incubators around. But what I was really impressed was in India when we kind of moved to this idea. There was competition between federal government and the state government. All of them wanted to fund. Okay, and this is innovative concept you've got a global perspective and access to global markets. They were quite warm. In fact, the people who have come on board as well to support, it's just been amazing. But one of the things which, again, I'm trying to facilitate with accelerators and incubators here, and I'm actually fostering that relationship back to Australia, between India and Australia, doing these launchpad activities, but also facilitate those partners and leverage diaspora. I totally stand for that. I've been Australian 15 years now. But yeah, leverage the diaspora and the linkages back. That's been something which has been helping some of these Australian companies to go there as well. So definitely agree with you, Marlene, and what you highlighted. But yeah, also be cautious about how to have the dynamics. But explore areas like agro-tech is huge opportunity there. Healthcare tech is huge. Education tech is huge. The whole Indian, even global market needs major skilling up for job readiness, especially data scientists, AI, M2M, all those aspects where I think UNSW and other leading universities can leverage. And also potentially space tech. And this is what I was talking to a gentleman out of ATP, Australian Technology Park. Traditionally, Australians have always leveraged NASA as a space tech. But NASA is now coming to India, an Indian Space Research Organization, and they've done some amazing stuff to leverage. So there's obviously opportunities there. One thing which I want to spark off, and again, not that I come from Kerala, the most beautiful part of India, but there's a lot of action happening in South India versus North India. What's your take on that?
Yeah, good. North versus south. Who wants to have a go? Ahmed, you want to recommend?
But no, so sectorally, yes. I think the West and South have industrialized better. They've got better quality of living. They've health standards, all of that. The North and eastern part of the country is lagging behind, and that's why industry is going where they are finding it easier. They're finding skilled talent. Talent is very, very, though India is graduating about 1 million, million students a month. Just look at that number, right? Million students a month. Finding good talent or skilled, appropriate talent is still a challenge, and that tends to be more in the West and the South, and that's why that's sort of progressing much better.
You're right about agri-tech. South Australia has got a project in Amarissa for agri-tech. There's a water project in Jaipur. So I think your point about diversity of the opportunities, spot on. Yes.
My name's John Hutchison.
There's a microphone.
Specialise in SMEs in any number of industries and international marketing. I once taught that in the University of New South Wales.
There you go.
Look, what I've heard tonight is that the rich are getting richer in India. The place is corrupt. Now I say that, I've got lots of Indian friends, including engineers, people that are working in trades, running restaurants and what have you, and I say to these Indian guys, why have you come here? I've got great groups out of the military, by the way, and they get shocked as to how many military people have come into Australia. Why have you come here? Well, the place is corrupt. Oh, but it must be changing because Modi's changing everything. And they don't believe it. Now, when I turn to my Chinese group, corruption is not one of the issues in China. You hear about it and what have you, but of course the Marxist system, socialist, fixes that. We heard that the other day from someone up there that spoke for 3.5 hours. Look, mention was made by the professor here that Australia should bring expertise to India. I believe if that happens, there'll be Indians educated in Australia, but there won't be people like myself. Look, on another issue, we haven't spoken about agricultural products. Well, what is the opportunity for agricultural products going into India? You know, we do fairly well in Indonesia. Are we getting anything into India, or have we got that opportunity?
That's a good question. Agriculture.
So agro products, agro facilitating products, there's a huge market. Agricultural exports, unfortunately, due to the free trade agreements not going ahead, are still not accessible for the Australian market. So dairy is a big challenge in India. So dairy products, which is a big strength of Australia, is not permitted in India. So there are certain challenges of finished agricultural products. But agro-tech or agri-supporting products, there's a huge opportunity.
Okay, we've got one here and then the last one at the back.
Hi, my name's Margaret Foe. I'm the founder and CEO of Synapse Medical Services, which is an SME with offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Chennai and Dubai. So I thought I'd just share some perspectives. Thank you all for your excellent perspectives on doing business in India. I established an office in Chennai. We have about 100 people in our office in Chennai. I went alone, so I didn't get a partner, foolishly perhaps. But can I just say to everyone in the audience, it's the best thing I've ever done for my business. I do not find doing business in India any harder than I find doing business, period. I also have an office in Dubai, and I have found the challenges of setting up a business, establishing an incorporated entity in Dubai more challenging than India. To your point, Marlene, you're quite right. When you do business in India, sometimes you'll have government agencies that don't pay you for a long time because you're a small business. But can I just say, the very same thing happens right here in Australia. As a small business, the government doesn't pay me very often either. And the other thing I would say that there's a lot of opportunities in South India. One of the reasons I chose South India specifically, to give you some context, I've been travelling in India for 30 years, doing business there for 8, with my own incorporated entity there for the last 2.5. And one of the reasons I chose South India was because of the high English literacy rates down there, and I knew I would need that. It was a little bit easier to do business in the south of India than doing business in places like Mumbai and Delhi, wonderful cities, but that's when you're a tourist, not when you're doing business. And the other thing is, it's very convenient and easy for me to get there. So I'm in India every 6 weeks. I'm going up again in a couple of weeks. And I jump on a plane here at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Singapore Airlines flight, and I am on the ground in Chennai at 10 p.m. local time. It's an easy change in Singapore. I'm at my hotel, I have my cup of sweet milky chai and 2 cookies, and I go to bed at 11:30, and I get up and I go to work the next day. And the other thing is, in terms of recruiting, I have not had the challenges that you described, Amit, in terms of getting a very talented workforce. But perhaps that's just because of the sector that I am in. So I have got a brilliantly talented, hungry, young, dynamic workforce, and I feel utterly privileged. The one thing I would like to say is this: I agree with Kylie, Australians are just missing out. I'm over there all the time, and I think there's only 2 other small businesses in Chennai that I'm aware of, 2 Australians. We're all very tight, but there's only 3 of us. And I think, where is the rest of Australia? You're just missing out on this great opportunity. And the other thing I would say is this: when we opened an office in India, and we are a little bit isolated down here at the bottom of the world, an island continent, and in some ways I do feel some challenges in Australia, because having an office in India is still sometimes seen in a negative light in my world. But for the rest of the world, it was seen as a necessity. So like having an Indian office in Australia is sometimes seen as a liability, and I have to say having an Indian office for everywhere else in the world is seen as a necessity. We were only taken seriously because we had an Indian delivery centre. So that in the Gulf region, where we're now working in Saudi Arabia and Dubai and the UAE, suddenly they thought, oh, Synapse, you're serious. You've got an Indian delivery centre. You've got 100 people. You can service our market. You couldn't do that if you were a tiny little office at the bottom of the world with 6 people in it. So for us, the decision to establish an office in India has been a brilliant business decision. I don't find it any harder than I do anywhere else in the world, and it's enabled us to fly.
Oh, well done, Margaret. Got to get on a future show or panel now, you've got yourself in. And finally over here, the Ross at the back.
Hi. I first went to India in 1988, and I enjoyed myself. It was a tourism visit for 8 weeks. And I travelled the railroads, and I'll come back to that with a question for Professor Raj regarding tourism and railroads. But really, my more recent perspective is to invest, rather than north-south, to invest east-west, being long Indian automotive industry and short the Western car industry. But actually being long US medical industry, where radiology has been outsourced to India. But my question really in that area is, when we come to investing in smaller companies, and I was thinking of the comment from Dr. Kanga about venture capital, and she mentioned Israel, we found ourselves actually interested in smaller investing, found difficulties investing in India, and we prefer to invest in Israel, where we've found companies have listed dually on Tel Aviv and NASDAQ. If you give me an update on I suppose, the stock market and getting listed equity in India, perhaps using the likes of NASDAQ in the US. And then a question for Professor Raj is, you mentioned the railroads and tourism. I was in the Customs House in the last year, and there's a fabulous exhibit of small narrow gauge railroads in the various states of India, and it was a photography exhibition by a man who's passed away. He spent a number of years photographing these narrow gauge railroads, and it struck me what a fantastic tourism opportunity. But when I got to the end point of this exhibition, the Indians weren't sure whether they were going to keep these narrow gauge railroads or rip them out. That's my question for Professor Raj.
Okay, so one from Marlene, one for Professor Raj.
Yeah, thank you.
So the narrow gauge railroads you're talking about would be around Darjeeling and Shimla. These are the micro gauges, right? Yeah, I think there isn't enough appreciation in India as to what is a valuable tourism asset. And so you go around, whether it is, you go to Delhi, and Delhi is really 7 cities. over a period of time. And so but the buildings are in total disrepair. You talk about these micro gauge railroads. They're wonderful. It's like when my wife and I go to Shimla, we have two campuses, one in Hyderabad, one in Mohali, which is in Chandigarh. And we go, and when we go to Shimla, my wife always wants to travel in this narrow gauge. It's a lot of fun, but most Indians would rather, go to Shimla on an SUV. And so, we really haven't. This is the point I was trying to make, that Australia has done a wonderful job on the tourist front. And I've seen Australians who've invested in Thailand, and they've invested in Singapore and Bali. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and it's
there's a narrow gauge railway up in northern Queensland. You can travel on. That's fantastic.
We're very good at marketing our unique experiences.
So I mean, my wife and I love these things. So when if we go, Shimla we go quite frequently, but now we haven't been to Darjeeling, and she's after me saying let's go to Darjeeling, but she really wants to go on the train, not to Darjeeling.
Well, thanks very much, everyone. We started with airports, we finished with railways, so we've had the true Indian experience. Would you please thank the panel? Half of EY, Kylie was going to say a couple of words, and then we're going to have the prize. Is that right?
Yes. So on behalf of EY, we're very pleased to host, I think we've been with UNSW on your India journey over the last few years, and we want to keep working with you and partnering with you. We're a big believer in the India story. Our innovation centre is also south. We have 20,000 people working in Kerala. Our global innovation hub as a multinational company is there as well. So, so on behalf of EY, thank you everyone for coming along. There is entertainment outside. There is a great prize to be won, which will give people some of those unique tourism experiences, let me tell you. And there's food, and importantly, there's wine. So please stay around, network. We're really pleased to talk with you offline if you have any questions or things you'd like to talk about India. And thank you, UNSW, for pulling this all together. It's a great week.
I think our sponsors, TCS, EY, and of course the Taj group of companies. And speaking of the Taj group of companies, I'd like to ask Laurie to announce the prize.
I think it's worth saying before I announce the prize that I was intrigued about the conversation in terms of India's tourism. And many of you are aware of the Incredible India campaign. And I just thought, amazing Thailand, something Indonesia, and I heard Incredible India and thought, I'll believe it when I see it. And then earlier this year, a very good Bengali friend of mine who's here this evening, Amit Dasgupta, we went to visit the Falak Numa Palace because we had an afternoon to kill in Hyderabad. And the Falak Numa Palace was completely out of this world. And it, again, and speaking about forts in India, also in Hyderabad you have the great Golconda Fort, which is like, the only thing I can say about going to Golconda Fort is it's like being in an episode of Game of Thrones. I was waiting for a dragon to come descending as I stood atop the fort. But India is just a country of great richness, great diversity, and the prize tonight, just so you're all aware, and again it's sponsored by our delightful friends at the Taj, at Taj Hotels, which is of course part of the Tata Group. So 2 nights at the Taj Palace in Mumbai, which is just a real icon of the great city of Mumbai. 2 nights at the Falak Numa in Hyderabad, which is just out of this world. If you go to the dining room, there are 101 seats on the dining table. I had a look at the billiard table, and there's only 2 in the world like it. One at the Falak Numa Palace and one at Buckingham Palace. And the last night is 1 night on a Taj safari. Now, I was precluded from putting my business card in the bowl for obvious reasons, and I must say I'm heartbroken. So with that plug, if it's a UNSW employee, then we're in big trouble. But transparency in this business is key. Has everyone put your business cards in? It's not. No, that's. No. I couldn't possibly comment.
How many did you put in?
It's an interesting contraption to put one's hands in, but.
If I win it again, there'll be trouble.
Okay, we have Matthew Yeh, Iman Australian Health Plans. Matthew, are you here? Come on up.
I've never.
Well, welcome to Incredible India.
I'll tell you what, mate, we do three nights on these things.
One here. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well done, everyone. Enjoy your drink. Thanks for coming.